And then you had some other textiles, such as wool and also silk and such as. And if you look at the synthetic fibers, it's produced from oil, which is a limited resource, and you cannot renew it. And if you then look at cotton, you need a lot of water, you also need a lot of pesticides, chemicals, and also you need a lot of land areas that compete with food production. On the other hand, when you look at viscose that are generated from the forest, you don't need any pesticides, you don't need any chemicals, and you don't compete with food production. And also you don't need to water the forest, and it is a renewable resource. So here is Liva. It's a natural fluid fashion fabric from Billa cellulose, which is a part of the Aditya group. The Liva fabric is created from natural cellulosic fibers from the forest and transform the garments and give them a liquid and soft drape. The Liva brand was launched in 2015, and the idea behind the Liva brand was to create a connection with the end consumers, because in the viscose fibers business, they are quite far ahead in the value chain, so they don't connect that much. And also they wanted to take along the complete value chain along with them. So a partnership called Liva Accredited Partner Forum was created in order to secure the whole value chain and give certificate for all the members. And how the customer described this fabric is a sense of flow combined with natural softness and comfort. So I believe the forest is a part of a sustainable textile fibers. It's a renewable resource. You don't need to water it, you don't need pesticides, and it doesn't compete with food production. And as long as the population increases, also does the demand for food and textiles. If you look at viscose, it's a man-made fiber made from the forest, and along with its unique attributes, such as good comfort feel, and also you have high absorbance, and it's breathable, then it is a textile fiber for the future. Here you have the whole value chain. You have the forest, you have the cellulose, which we produce at Domsjöfabriker. We have the viscose fiber, the yarn, the fabric, which is Liva, that is made into fashion. So here you have it, from forest to fashion. So thank you for your attention.
And now we move on to Katarina Wehm. Welcome.
Thank you.
Shall we applaud her too, Sophie?
Thanks.
You have to work a little as well in the audience.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'll go back here just because I'd like to introduce Stockholm International Water Institute. We are a not-for-profit independent policy institute addressing the global water challenges. Every year we hold and host World Water Week here in Stockholm, and also award the Stockholm International Water Prize, which a couple of years back was given to the waterman of India, Rajendra Singh. There are actually a number of Indian prize winners over the years, because we've been awarding this prize for 25 years. One of the biggest projects that CV is running is the Sweden Textile Water Initiative. Here are, I think, pretty much all the companies. I think we have a couple of newcomers that are brands that have joined our initiative. It started as we call it a cluster group, where we bring together stakeholders to address certain challenges. Indiska and their corporate representatives walked into our offices and said, We have worked in India for years. We have addressed social and labor-related challenges, but the big elephant in the room is water. What do we do? Very honestly, as a policy institute, we said, we don't know, because we haven't really worked with these challenges specifically related to production in that kind of way, because policy has been our key orientation. But we said, let's try to figure this out and learn from this process together. 30 Swedish companies joined the initiative, and for 2 years, we very openly discussed, set all our, let's say, all the competition aside, shared experiences, shared knowledge, brought in knowledge that we did not have, and developed guidelines for the textile and leather industries and the water use in these industries, in manufacturing. When we had the guidelines, we felt, well, okay, how do we know that this works? We, together with 3 brands, Indiska, Kappahl, and Lindex, Swedish brands, piloted this with the support of the Swedish government and the Swedish Development Agency in India. And I think that thanks to India and the work that we were able to do there, we today have an extremely widespread, and we have a global program. But I'll illustrate this a little bit with the SWAR program. What we do is the brands nominate their manufacturers, their factories to this program. And it's very much about technical competence. It's of course about looking at effluents and how do you treat the water that's used, but it's also very closely linked to chemical use and energy use. So it becomes quite a big sustainability scope for a factory. And since we were a policy institute, I think that our approach was a bit different. Because of course there are large international consultancies that can provide technical advice to factories. Energy audits, water audits, etc. But that's a one-time visit to a factory where they visit, welcome, where they make the assessments. And what we do, however, is that we actually try to build capacity among the staff in the factory, the workers, but then of course the management as well. And I think that that has been the success of this program. We have very detailed KPIs for the different areas, whether it's water, energy, chemicals, and we can show that being sustainable actually saves the manufacturers money. So sustainability, which often is thought of as that it's going to just cost me a lot of money, well, actually, long term, it will save you money. Because also in India, where water is so scarce, and where the textile industry is so dependent on water, this allows for more water use, not only for the factories, but of course also for the communities nearby. Today, we have a global program. Last year, when we looked at our achievements, having worked in India, China, Turkey, Bangladesh, and Ethiopia, we have measured that we've saved about 3.5 million cubic meters of water. This is the equivalent of the daily need for 67 million people. And since we use the KPIs, the numbers, the appeal really increases among factories and brands to join. This 35 million cubic meters of water, it really, in the textile context, it is 6% of the water use, and the actual 7.3% of the water use per kilo textile. The industry in India is growing. It has huge projections for 2047, but there are a lot of challenges. And I think that the willingness to pay for sustainability initiatives and adherence to regulation and addressing compliance. Avoiding corruption is a key for 2047. Thank you.
And now we will listen to Hemant for a little while.
Excellent.
Welcome up.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Hemant, and I'm Chief Design Officer with a company in India called Godrej. Now, many of you have probably not heard of Godrej before, so a short introduction is that we make everything from satellites to soap, and pretty much everything in between. We use a lot of textiles because we have a very large furniture business, but we don't actually make textiles. My background is also not as a textile designer, so when I think of textiles, I take for myself a fairly loose or a fairly broad definition of what a textile even is. And can we pull up the video? So I'll share with you, maybe start with the traditional definition of the word textile. So it's a type of cloth or woven fabric, and that's generally how we understand it. But if you think about textiles in the modern context, there's a lot more that's going on. So this is traditional. There's cotton, there's indigo, there's all the things that you associate with India. But then there's also carbon fiber, right? And you can take carbon fiber, weave it into parts for the Dreamliner, for example, the entire fuselage of an aircraft. Nike has done wonderful work with textiles and their Flyknit range of shoes, which basically is pretty much all they do at this point. Industrial textiles made of stainless steel for industrial applications, filtration, things like that. And then there are textiles of different types in all of the tires and all of our cars, the Apple Watch, and then projects like Jacquard, which is something that Google did with weaving conductive fibers into things like denim, which Levi's is going to produce now. So I thought I'd share with you this morning basically snapshots of a workbook that we produced for sharing with our board of directors earlier this year in April. And that's my small textiles team at the Design and Innovation Center. And this is a snapshot of some of the work that we've done over the last year. And it's all very experimental. It's all fairly small scale because we're still investigating what the possibilities are for textiles in India and for our company. So we work with mostly natural fibers. We work with local artisans and craftsmen. But at the end of the day, we also have to scale up. So we figure out ways of doing that sort of meaningfully and low impact. We create things like this, which is furniture that's made entirely of textiles, like felt, combining machine-made and man-made. So all the chair frames are obviously made with machines, but all the work on them is done by hand. Laser-cut steel that's also combined with textiles, again, kind of experimental furniture, which we're going to release fairly soon. These are prototypes and that are right there in our design labs. This is some work we've done with Form Us with Love, which is a wonderful design consultancy right here in Stockholm. And these are prototypes from that process. India, for those of you who visited, you will know is also a very noisy place. And sound attenuation or making spaces quieter and calmer is a big part of what we're looking at. And so these are experiments with looking at different materials and different geometries and different technologies to make calmer homes and workspaces. But obviously with all of this, we also look at kind of more traditional materials and processes. So India is known for indigo, so we're doing quite a lot of work with indigo, but doing it again in a very sustainable and meaningful way. I have gotten to see examples like over here of natural dyes and colors that I've actually never seen before, which is good for me to see as a product designer. And then we're doing experimental work with recycled or upcycled materials. So this is packaging waste that's then being turned into furniture. Again, prototypes. We're going to release this very soon. And you can see when you look at it from a distance, there's really no difference from virgin material. And new applications of traditional craft. And this is something I want to talk about a little bit because when we talk about Project Jacquard and weaving conductive fibers into denim, saris in India have been around for thousands of years. And if you're familiar with saris, and there's embellishment in saris that's done with gold thread, and gold thread is conductive. And so we've had conductive fiber within our clothing already for thousands of years. And how can we take things that we already know from India, so the tradition and the heritage, and turn that into something that is very appropriate for modern times? So that's a big part of our focus as a group.
And now Riju Junjunwala. Welcome up.
Thank you. So I don't have any slide prepared, but I thought I'll just talk a little bit about our company and what we do, and how personally I see from the topic like Textiles 2047, how it's going to shape up. So a little bit about us. We're an Indian-based textile company belonging to a larger group which is into power and graphite, etc. Within textiles, it's a 50-year-old company, and most of our work is in spinning, which is spinning the yarns, both cotton and synthetic, and we are a large customer of Liva from Aditya Birla also. And we also make some denim fabrics, home textiles, and the regular suit fabrics that you see on the cheaper side, polyester viscose fabric, and selling mostly in the domestic market. Our yarns and fabrics, etc., are exported to more than 39 companies, and we've been fortunate that we've been around for the last 50 years. And like everyone's mentioning over here, I mean, personally, I think 50 years has passed by as far as textile is concerned, but really the world, especially in textiles, we're standing at an inflection point kind of thing, wherein there's so much change in technology happening in the last 4 or 5 years that it's leaving some older companies which doing business in the conventional way. I think they'll be very, very challenged in the next 3 to 4 years to come. Having said that, textile, whether it is 2047 or whether it was 1985 or whatever year, there will always be some amount of conventional touch required in the textile business, which companies need to hold on to. At the same time, I mean, as far as 2047 is concerned, I think you can broadly break it down into 4 different themes that we'll be trying to look at. One is this Industrial Revolution 4.0. I mean, you're talking about more production, machines talking to each other, technology playing a more robust role compared to labor as far as the times were concerned. 3D printing, like you saw, I mean, in Hemant's presentation, you saw a lot of change happening. So questions like whether 3D printing can completely change the way traditional textiles is done. I mean, today you have 20 or 40 different processes for a shirt to be made. Is it possible that in 2047 or even much closer than that, you'll have one dye put at home and you'll have shirts being printed out? What will happen to all the labor? What will happen to all the environmental concerns? You can have shirts or etc. being printed out of 3D printer, which are synthetic in nature, which have certain amount of chemicals. But stuff like cotton, etc., if people are used to wearing cotton, there's only one way to produce cotton. You cannot push the cotton fiber into a 3D cartridge and have that producing shirts. Then you have, the extremely fast changing habits of the younger people. You spoke about India, for example. I was looking this morning. Sweden has a population of 10 million people. India has a population of 1.3 billion people, out of which 50% are below the age of 25 years. And their habits and all are completely different to what we are used to, I think, in the last 10 or 15 years. And which technology, e-commerce, etc., you're seeing the kind of growth in urban retail in India, which you probably last saw in telecom. For example, in India, you have clusters of villages which are so difficult to reach that you probably don't even have electricity, roads, etc., in a lot of these villages. But they are having now access to brands, to cheaper brands like Zara, etc., or even much cheaper than that because of e-commerce, because everyone has a smartphone, they can all order online. So how are the consumption habits going to grow is traditional retail, which is the backbone of the textiles. Is it going to stay the way it is 30 years down the line? Are we still going to get into those big showrooms and buy, or e-commerce and cheaper fashion is going to take over? Something like fast food has taken over. Is it going to be like fast fashion, where people just buy more of disposable stuff and less of those heavy high-end things? That's something to think about. And then, of course, the last but not the least important point being sustainability. I think, again, in the last 5 years that I've been involved in, for the last 20 years, I've never spoken about the word sustainability, I think, for the first 10 years that, if you'd ask me honestly, about in India. But in the last 10 years, all we are talking about is sustainability, whether it is to do with water, dyes, or chemicals. And we work a lot with Swedish companies like IKEA, H&M and all. And I can tell you in the last 4 years, on one side, it's been hell working with these companies for the first 2 years, because even to get that first order, you need to go through 2 years of these compliances, etc. But having said that, I mean, once it starts, the business is good. And not only the business is good, we've learned so many things from them in terms of, things that, I can honestly share. We were having labor which is working for 12 hours. We used to have certain, things like cotton we are buying from any farmer. We are not indulging in fair trade or etc. When these companies come into you and you have to do business with them on a global scale, they force you for 2 years, they do all the audits. So today, we can proudly say that at least in all our plants, we don't have one single plant which is giving out any effluent water with dyes and chemicals outside. Earlier, we used to be very casual about it. Used to make, those dyes and chemicals coming out, you dry them up, make cakes out of them and just sell them off in the market. But no, these companies ensure you have zero water discharge. Your labor is not working more than 8 hours. You've got proper meals, facilities, etc. from them. So what I'm saying is, I think one major theme that every company, not only India, but across the world has to look at, along with fashion, along with cost, along with energy cost, high fashion, water, this thing is sustainability. It's no longer just a fashionable word, that we used to hear that 3 years back. Sustainability, companies are willing to pay a price for that. Customers are willing to pay a price for that. IKEA, when I first went to meet them, the first thing to me was, I think that 2030, by 2020, we will stop buying any fresh polyester fabric from any company in the world. We will only buy recycled polyester fabric, which is made out of PET bottles. And by 2030, they say our aim is to not have any oil-based production as far as the company's home textile business is concerned. So how is that going to change for companies like us, which are mainly in the synthetic business, and cotton is just a small portion of it? Again, these are things to look at. And obviously, India, as far as textile is concerned, we've got a booming trade. We've got 1.3 billion people to dress up. I think and as the country is getting richer in terms of, the per capita income, etc., the money in hand of people is much more. Technology, as far as textile is concerned, at least whatever I have seen, it's the same in terms of spinning, in terms of weaving, what was happening 30 years back. It's still the same today. You can have some improvements in technology. Instead of producing 5 kgs an hour, you could be producing 7 kgs an hour. But there has been no real breakthrough in textile as far as real technology is concerned, which will probably lead to a lot more social issues, like what will you do with all the labor in India, China and all, which is there. But I'm happy to say that with the help of at least companies like which are Swedish companies, Scandinavian, American and all, one thing that has been set into the Indian brain, which we were quite casual about, I think 5 or 7 years back, the environment story, which is very, very important. I think as responsible companies, all of us have a lot of thing to focus on that. And I think the points that I mentioned about changing behavior, etc., companies like us, really, the older 50-year-old companies have to really look into the future and see as to where the demand is going to come from, whether it is going to come from cotton or synthetics or these new kind of fibers, and how do we really take care of that in a cost-efficient manner. And I think it'll be great talking more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. Here you said you work a lot with IKEA and the Swedish companies have been nagging, etc. I recently had a discussion with the IKEA management team, and they were saying that something fantastic is happening in India. We're talking about changing behavior with designers and so on. They got the best designers in the design schools, and maybe you are one of those new generations. They are not so interested in becoming the star designers, individual designers themselves, but they are very interested in going into textile production to improve it, etc., or to change behaviors. Do you see that happening a lot? Because I think we would need to learn from that as well, or engineers or social workers.
Yeah, see, like I said, there's no dearth of people in India. There are 1.3 billion people, and a lot of young people who are actually joining textile engineering, textile design, etc. Textile, which used to be seen as a kind of sunset sector 5 years back, now new younger people are joining. And I think with companies like H&M, IKEA and all coming, who already have a big base for design, development and everything, I think if we can harness best of the both, in terms of having the Indian designers who are really creative, etc., but they don't have the vision or they don't have the market as yet in India to test whatever they are saying. So I think with both these companies combining, Indian companies and the Western companies which have more money to spend on R&D, research, etc., it will lead to a lot of benefit for all.
And of course, a big company like you, if you make a change, it has a great impact.
Correct.
Yeah, and so it will be interesting to hear what is your next move. You have a comment on this as well? Or?
I do. So I look at this more from a historical perspective. So if you think about the history of technology and the history of textiles, you can go back maybe 2,000 or 3,000 years, and there were 3 centers of excellence in the world where a lot of this came from. It was China and Persia and India. right? So how you make yarn, how you grow cotton or other fibers, how you make fabrics out of it, all of it came from these places. And it's interesting to look at the development of textiles in India, where, for those of you who've been to India, you know there's a wide variety of textiles. A lot of these things are made by hand. And you look at some of these techniques and some of these materials, and they're absolutely, absolutely fantastic. Yet there's something very tragic that's also happened, which I think is something that designers can address, and they're trying to address, in that all of these marvelous technologies and all of these marvelous traditions have become largely irrelevant to us today in India. I mean, if you look at the clothes that we're wearing, these are almost exactly the same sorts of clothes you'd find people wearing in India if this were a conference there. So the sari that I talked about has now been relegated to maybe a very niche sort of garment. You might wear it to a party or a wedding. What we'd like to do, though, is take that entire body of knowledge, and we'd like to take all those craftsmen, all the people who really know how this stuff is done in so many different ways, and translate that into something that is meaningful for everyday use. And so I encourage all of my designers to do that. Anytime I teach, I encourage people to think in that way as well. And as a company, because we do have a much larger audience, and we are definitely interested in, and we do mass production, we'd like to take some of these ideas and bring them to a larger audience. So that's our...
Of course, we see that in all of Europe and Sweden too, that there is a thirst or a need to go back to the roots and to your own traditions and small-scale businesses in food and design and everything. Do you have a comment on, how we can combine this sort of small-scale handicrafting with large businesses? Is it possible? How can we do that in the future? Will it help us, the new technology, to not to lose the old knowledge, but to keep it?
Yeah, I think that the variety needs to be there. It will be a huge travesty if we forget the traditional knowledge that is there. Whether it's in food production, where in Sweden there's been a revival, small-scale production, local production, or whether it's in textiles.
The knowledge, so you don't forget how to do things. And now you can probably, because you have new kind of things and new technology, you probably can do things much better and look at things differently. So you don't pollute that much and so on. So you can look at old processes that maybe wasn't possible for 100 years ago, but maybe is possible to do today because the technology has come so much forward.
You were talking a lot about now with the viscose fibers, the new materials of the future, and maybe the forest is the answer. Of course, for us having a lot of forest, that might be easy, but are there any other materials? Which will be the new materials of the future?
I think that the basis for any material are three. I mean, cotton, polyester, or viscose. And then you have, of course, the smaller fibers. Now, within that, what we can do, I think recycled polyester is one of the biggest, this thing where, you have recycled this is a glass bottle, but the other bottle, you just recycle that and you make it. H&M, for example, we are doing a large program from them where we get these jeans, the jeans that have already been worn by people, back into a factory. You cut them and make them back into fibers. And then you spin it again and convert it back into jeans. So
and it works.
And it works. I mean, jeans, you don't really care whether it's soft or little hard or something. So you have to really see the applications end of the day. Some applications like high-end shirts, etc., will always remain probably high quality cotton, whether it is 2017 or 2047. But the kind of fibers that you see coming up like in technology and sportswear, etc., for now, you don't even need to wear like those devices to tell your blood pressure or heart rate and all. You have these fibers that you can just wear a tight shirt and it'll tell you constantly. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but it'll tell you on your phone there and then what your heart rate is every minute that you're walking. So there's so much change happening that one really needs to see who will adapt how to the change, whether someone would not like wearing that shirt or someone would really want to convert to how much of your life you really want to be led by technology and how much to stay out of it.
But I think also from a sustainability perspective, it's polyesters, even though it's recycled, it is a challenge for the future because it ends up being a micro pollution. And we need to really do a lot more R&D on the sustainability consequences of new fibers. That's why I believe very strongly in bio-based fibers, whether it's linen or cellulose products. And Sweden, we are so far up here in the north But we're one of the biggest exporters of forest-based products, even though the growth time is so short, so long here. But if in countries where the trees end up growing much, much faster, if we can do R&D on those cellulose fibers, that would be something.
You were talking about the elephant in the room, the water challenge that is so big here, and that the scarce that you don't have enough water. I mean, there are experiments being done with producing textile without water, but it's probably very expensive. Can we produce textile without water, or will we have new solutions for this? Do you have anything big going on right now? Or? With this project that you were doing, it reduced the water.
It reduces, but it is within the existing processes. But I do think, I mean, that is also part of R&D. And but there might be other challenges. Water is key from the perspective that we all need it. It's needed for textiles, it's needed for human consumption, but it's also needed for energy production. I mean, so water is needed for everything. So it has a very, very, I would say it's a staple within most of the sustainability issues.
We only have 4 minutes left, right? So
too bad.
Yeah, too bad. Okay. This the big issue is, of course, there has been R&D done. It is possible to do things without oil or without chemicals or without water, but how can you maintain profitability and yet be very sustainable? Can it be profitable to be more sustainable? Can you all
absolutely
comment on that?
From our experience, but then let's go to business. Absolutely. We've shown it in our project and we continue demonstrating it.
No, definitely. I mean, like she said, in all our plants now, we are not throwing out the water, we are consuming the water back, and we just, the last 0.2% that water that you make, even that you have to convert to steam and just let it out later. So, I mean, tomorrow if you're consuming a lot of water and your factory stops because of lack of water, you're losing a lot of profit. So that much cost you just need to add into your system. I think it's a given now. I think there's no two ways about it that you can keep consuming water and throwing it the way you were in earlier times. Whether it is India or Sweden or America or any other place of manufacturing. I think companies just have to know that water is scarce and you cannot throw it out.
Any comment on?
Yeah, I also think it's possible to keep the profit, because if I just look at Domsjö Fabriker, we have a slogan like we make more from the tree. So we try to take as much of the tree we can get and do different kind of products. And also we need to be careful about the water, but since we have a lot of water in Sweden, we are allowed to have a lot of in the process, but you need to think about it also. But yeah.
You had a comment that in 2050 we will be using 25 to 40 kilos of textile.
Yeah.
Do you really, is that really, are we increasing all the time?
Yeah, it's an estimation,
yes,
but
of course.
that's what they believe that we will use.
Or can we change our behavior?
Right, so it was
interesting,
interesting hearing about profits, because at the end of the day, every business needs profits, right? I mean, that's what pays all of our salaries, that's what allows us to travel here and talk to all of you. But at the same time, I think it's also important to remember that we have a larger responsibility than just that. And one of the companies that I support and subscribe to is Patagonia, based out of the US, and my pants are Patagonia, and these are recycled plastic bottles, and I wear, something by Patagonia pretty much every day. But another very nice thing that they've done is they have a repair program. So if something goes wrong with these, they have a lifetime warranty. I can go back to a Patagonia store and they will fix them for you. Now, for a company that sells clothes and that's how they make their money, that's actually a very large move, because they're encouraging you to not buy new clothes all the time. They also have a program where if I were to get tired of wearing these because they simply don't wear out, I could give them back to the Patagonia store and they will recondition them and sell them as used clothing. So for a large organization to do something like that, I think is commendable. So we'll see more of that.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
and of course that happens to several now. Swedish furniture company has started to do that too. You said back to having
new business models.
New business models. Yeah. We have a lot of responsibility for the future generations. We hear that we can learn a lot from each other. Even if we were nagging very hard at you with IKEA and H&M, we are all moving. And I think that there are very future strong perspectives for India and textile in 2047. I don't know if we can say a vision with no water, no oil, and church made in 3D for 2047. But I think a lot of progress will happen.
Yep.
And thank you all for being here. I'm sorry we cannot continue. It's already time.